Hi everyone, my name is Irina. I work here at the New Bridge Assisted Living in the programming department, and my background is botany. So I'm going to talk about plants again, and today, for a change of pace, we are going to discuss a home plant and a very popular one. These are African violets. Everyone knows them and adores them. They are tame, they are cozy, they are homey, but has it always been that way? Not really. They are still growing somewhere out there in the wild, and that part is literally unknown. So let's go together and explore. Let's start. So as I said, African violets are very popular around the world. And they are everyone's favorite in every country, especially in the Western world. But what is an African violet? How is it different from any other violet? Well, the answer is that they don't have anything in common with the other violets, period. Not really anything, even though they are lookalikes with all the rest of the violets. Now, in this frame, you see 4 different pictures. This is a puzzle for you. Can you please guess which one of these 4 is an African violet? The 3 of them are true violets, and only one is an African violet. Now, I won't torture you for a long time. Here is the answer. African violet is number 1. And its Latin name is Saint Paulia ionantha. As you can see, it is so much alike every other type of violet. No wonder it is called a violet, but actually they belong to different families and have nothing to do in common. The other 3 violets that you see in this frame are ours from Massachusetts: birdfoot violets, small white violet, and common blue. They all belong to the violet family, but the African violet belongs to Gesneriad or Gesneriad family. It's hard for me to explain the difference just because both these families are tropical families and we don't have much exposure. For example, in the violet family, there are actually even big trees, but we don't know any of them because they are all from the tropics. And the only thing that we have around here from that family is our beloved violets, wild violets, I mean. In the world, there is more than 1,000 different species, or about 1,000, I should say, wild violets. But this is about all that we have. This genus, violet, viola, is all that we have around in the temperate regions of that violet family. And the same is true for Gesneriad family. It's another tropical family. And it's even more tropical because if we have some violets, at least from the violet family, we have literally nothing from Gesneriad family. And all of other representatives are also home plants. We don't have anything in the wild from that family. Well, the only other thing that I can point out today, another familiar Gesneriad would be Gloxinia, but this is another home plant. So my point is that African violets are related to Gloxinia, let's say, but they are completely unrelated to our normal violets, and we have to keep that in mind. Well, let's go back to our subject. the gesneriads or gesneriads, the African violets. As you know, there are very many of them. There is a wild variety of thousands of different kinds of violets. But believe it or not, none of them occur in nature. They are all horticultural varieties. They are a result of artificial crossings made by humans. They don't occur in nature. And these horticultural varieties are also called cultivars. So we're dealing with thousands of cultivars, and they can be very, very attractive and beautiful and even strange and bizarre and versatile. But here is a hint. How do you tell a horticultural variety from a real species? You look at the name, and if the name is fancy like this, beachcomber or a warm sunshine or bridal bouquet, then we are dealing with a horticultural variety. But let's look at the species, the wild thing from which these varieties were developed. Well, believe it or not, all these thousands of different cultivars were mostly developed from a single species that was found in the wild. And its name, up until recently at least, for more than a century, was Saint Paulia ionantha. Ionantha actually means having flowers like those in true violets. And this is, of course, very true. It does look like our regular violet. Well, Saint Paulia ionantha is not the only one. There are 8 other known Saint Paulias, and this is just one species that has become the most popular of all of them. Well, another complication is that very recently, molecular biologists, while studying Saint Paulias, decided to rename them. Of course, that's their favorite. That's their favorite trick. They rename everything. This time, they decided to include Saint Paulias in another closely related species that is called Streptocarpus. They figured out that the genome of St. Paulia fits within the genome of Streptocarpus. And so this happened in 2015. And from now on, we have to call St. Paulia Streptocarpus. So it became Streptocarpus ionanthus instead of St. Paulia ionantha. But of course, the entire world it will take us some time to get used to this novelty. And many people still call this little plant Saint Paulia, including myself. So I hope you don't mind me calling it still Saint Paulia. But let's look at the place where these cute plants are growing in the wild, finally. And for that, we will have to go far away from our home, right to East Africa. And East Africa is a very interesting region from which they say the entire humankind is originating. That's the region from which humanity, all the folks have spread all across the globe. And this is, we are looking, if we're looking at the African continent, from my childhood, I have this image in my mind. When I'm looking at Africa, I see a human head. And so here is the nose, here is the ear, the hair, And this is the mouth. And if we look right under the nose of Africa, but higher than the mouth, that's the region we are talking about right now. So here we are. This is the border between Kenya and Tanzania. And you see that the border is straight, but it's making a little swirl because it's going around the highest mountain on the African continent. That's the famous Mount Kilimanjaro. And on the other side of Tanzania border, the western Tanzanian border, there is this big lake Tanganyika, and it was there on the shore of that lake that Livingstone met with someone who was going to rescue him after 6 years that Livingstone had been lost for the rest of the world. That happened on the shore of this lake Tanganyika. And on the northern side, you see the huge Lake Victoria. This is the largest lake, judging from the area, on the continent of Africa. So this is a very prominent region. And starting from the border of Kenya, you see the mountains, East Rift Valley, and even farther to the east, closer to the Indian Ocean, you see a small arc of mountains that is called Eastern Arc, and they consist of Usambara Mountains and another range, another small range, which has this African name that is difficult to pronounce even, Nguye Mountains. So Mount Kilimanjaro is the highest freestanding mountain in the world. It is 19,000 feet tall above the sea level, if you count from the sea level. And if you count from the plateau on which it is standing, it is 16,000 feet above the plateau. So it's the tallest point on the continent of Africa. And this is the starting point of the Eastern Arc Mountains, which we are going to look a little closer at. Now, this is the same area. The gray spot at the northern part is the Mount Kilimanjaro, and then all these little green islands are the leftovers of the forests that are on tops of the Eastern Arc Range. And this area has a nickname, the Galapagos of Africa. This is because it boasts a very large variety of different plants and animals. The biodiversity is extremely high here. It's one of the top 20 higher diversity areas on the globe. So there is about 800 endemic plants. Endemic means that these plants don't occur anywhere else in the world but in this small region. And some of the plants are present only on on a single hilltop within this mountain range. That's how small the areas are. So this is a very precious area, very rich of interesting species of plants and animals. And the reason it is so rich is that because it is very, very ancient. It was formed a few millions years ago, and the forests that are distributed on these mountains are actually one of the oldest in the world. This forest is literally 2 million years old, believe it or not. So it's the old growth forest. And the northern part of this eastern arc range is called Usambara Mountains. This name is very important to us because African violets are growing right there. And in fact, in the part of the world, they are known as Usambara violets, including many different countries. But in other countries, including the United States, they are known as just African violets. So African or Usambara violets. These are two legitimate common names. And now we are in the Usambara Mountains, in the eastern part, which is the most interesting. And in this part, there has been organized a nature reserve, finally, as late as in 1997. And it's tiny, it's even tinier than the entire area we're talking about is not large, but the reserve itself is only 32 square miles. It's squeezed between developed areas of tea plantations, coffee plantations, you name it. So there is very few intact nature that has been left in this area, and people are they're trying to preserve it, which is a very challenging assignment. Within that preserved area, there is a botanic garden, actually taking away from the reservation another 1.2 square miles. This is actually not such a good idea because botanic garden usually accumulates non-native plants, and they can easily escape from a botanic garden out into the wild and spoil their native habitats, which otherwise would be more intact without being subject to being abattoirs of a botanic garden. So within this 32 square miles, there is only 4 square miles of the forest itself, only 4 square miles within that reservation. So we're talking about very small areas that have been preserved so far. But these very small areas boast over 600 species of trees and over 3,000 plant species on the whole, many of which are endemic, as I said. So that's what the habitat of African violets looks like. It is a rocky brook bank, and it is surrounded by lush vegetation. And you see that the air is foggy because this is a cloud forest. This is a tropical cloud forest, a very rare habitat that is not so common even in Africa anymore. The forest, here are some parameters of the forest of Eastern Arc Range. Its original area used to be 23 and a half and 23,700 square kilometers, and the contemporary area, what's left, is only 300 square kilometers. So this is an ancient forest, and there is no comparison with other areas of the world in terms of its age. Its age is 2 million years. And that's how the violets grow on rocks in their natural habitat in that particular reserve. The photograph was taken in this Amani Nature Reserve. So as I said, St. Polia ionanta is only one of the 8 species that are right now known to science. And they keep finding more indigenous species of St. Polia in that little area. For example, recently there was described another species which was named St. Polia titanensis, because it was found in the Taita Hills. So the name is after the area in southern Kenya where they discovered it. This plant is known from only a single hill whose name is Mbolo Hill. And this is a tiny area of 1 square kilometer where this plant occurs. And now we are looking at the portrait of a man whom we obliged for discovering this plant and introducing it to the Western world. His name was Baron Adalbert Saint Paul Hilaire. The name is actually longer than that. I abbreviated it. So this man was a German district commissioner in 1892. He was walking around the area where he was living in Eastern Africa, in Tanganyika. That was at the time the German East Africa. So it was a German colony, and he was the German district commissioner. And he discovered this plant, St. Polia ionanta. He was apparently a big fan of plants, a plant lover, and he sent the plant immediately to his dad in Germany. His dad was Baron Ulrich von St. Paul Hilaire. And this Baron further sent this plant to Royal Botanic Gardens in Hanover. This all happened within Germany. And the director of the Hanover Botanic Gardens, Hermann Wendland, was holding an international horticultural exhibit. He was a participant. The exhibit was taking place in Belgium during the next year, 1893. And so he brought it to this exhibition under the name Usambara Weilichen in German, which means Usambara violet in English. And this became like a centerpiece of the entire exhibition. And at the show, Usambara Weilichen were nominated the most interesting item of the entire exhibit. And so from that time on, they have become popular, more and more popular throughout the world. But of course, at that time, they were only known as a species. There were no horticultural varieties yet. Well, let's look at why this person who described the first saw the violets was there in Africa to begin with. It was in the 1880s that the Germans took possession of the territories in East Africa. And at first it was a small institution, like a farm. And then when the Africans became unhappy with their presence and revolted, the German troops were summoned to the continent, and from that point on, it became an official colony of Germany in East Africa. And for a long while, it was known as German East Africa. And the Germans spent quite a lot of time there until the end of the First World War, which they lost, and they with that they lost this territory, and it was divided between 2 or 3 different countries: Belgium, Britain, and maybe some more countries, and it was under the international mandate from that time on. But at the time we're looking at, this was the German colony, and the Germans, of course, brought a lot of civilization and education and religion, Christianity to the African continent at that time. The country was known, the Tanzania was known under a different name, Tanganyika at the time. And the area was called German East Africa, as I said. Of course, immediately they started to exploit the area and started a lot of plantations growing coffee and tea and other cultivated things and cleaning this precious forest. And that's the time from which the shrinking of the forest started. And so if we jump to the contemporary photograph of the area, that's what the area looks like. So usually the forests are pushed away and large areas are now developed, and they are under different cultivated plants. So that's why we are dealing with just leftovers of this tropical cloud forest right now and trying to save this. And in order to save this, many different institutions are putting their foot there and trying to contribute to this effort. For example, this man is a volunteer from the local organization, and he is trained by the Missouri Botanical Garden. And he alone has made over 5,700 collections and found a lot of new species, not just this species, not just this violet, but many other plants in this area. And of course, they have their own troubles with invasive plants there. But their problems are different from our problems with invasive plants. For example, this tree is called umbrella tree, and it's native to Africa, but it's native to West Africa. In West Africa, they are now trying to repopulate the forest, and they are propagating it and planting it everywhere in order to replant their forests. But in East Africa, in the area we are talking about, this plant has become invasive, and of course it's taking over disturbed areas first. Because there is a lot of disturbed areas, this plant is going rampant in the area of our conversation today. It is displacing native forest there. This map shows us a few interested parties that have been putting their effort in research and maintenance of this precious area and the native violets that grow there. Because people are concerned that there are more species that are not even discovered and they can disappear from the world even before we have a chance to discover them. So the very first party that we are looking at is this university at Buffalo, New York, where they have been doing genome sequencing in order to understand the violets better and contribute to their cultivars. So this is one of the staff. This is evolutionary biologist Victor Albert. He is doing this genome sequencing project, and he he's working on it together with another woman whose name is Charlotte Lindquist, and they are going to describe this project in a few words on their own. We are going to listen to a short video where you will hear both of them, but you will be able to only see Charlotte Lindquist.
The African violet is a very common houseplant that is the basis of a multi-million-dollar industry. They're extremely easy to grow. They flower virtually all the time.
But the paradox is that the natural populations of African violets are largely threatened because of loss of their habitat in southeast Kenya and northeastern Tanzania. So we're doing this crowdfunding project in order to raise money to sequence the entire genome of an African violet, the genome being all the genetic material in an organism.
For conservation purposes, sequencing the African violet genome will be key because it'll give us a perspective on the evolutionary history of the species.
Having a genome of the African violet will inform us about how the African violet has adapted to past environmental changes. And this information we can use to inform us in how the African violet might adapt or respond to future changes, both when it comes to habitat encroachment and also to changes in the environment and global climate.
This is the start of a much larger project where we would hope to sequence multiple individuals and multiple species of African violet to hopefully be able to better prioritize which populations to conserve for future generations.
All right, now we are back to our map, and look how many American institutions are trying to help African violets. Now we're looking at another one, which is located in New York City. This is African Rainforest Conservancy. This is its president, Carter Coleman, and this logo of African Rainforest Conservancy, which is very appropriately abbreviated as ARC, which is the name of the mountains they're trying to preserve. So we'll read an excerpt of his own words. I will read it for you because I don't have the recording from him. In my 20s, in 1989, I moved to the edge of a 3,000-foot cliff in the Uzampara Mountains of Tanzania to fly a hang glider and write a novel. I built a one-room stone house on a spectacular spot where the sky met sheer gray cliffs, festooned with hanging gardens of tropical green. Soaring above the base of the clouds, I could see below how badly the mountains were scared. The rainforest that had cloaked the Usambaras for millions of years was mostly gone. Only patches remained. The last stand of ancient forest was set on the high summit of the ridge. I used to go there to marvel at ocotea trees, almost the size of redwoods. A botanist told me the big ocoteas were 1,000 years old. One day in 1991, I saw that 2 dozen of the giants had been felled. They were being cut into long planks by two men. I jumped on an old motorcycle and drove 10 hours to Dar es Salaam, the capital, where I had the conference with the American ambassador and his wife. They helped me re-register the Tanzania Forest Conservation Group. The Dilamators helped me raise the first funds to start the first village project, for it was quickly apparent that the key to conserving the remaining forest was by helping the neighboring villages. Then I came back to New York City and met up with Michelle Clark and the other founders of the Tanzania Wildlife Fund, the predecessor to ARC. After more than 25 years, we can look back proudly on what has been accomplished while trying not to be daunted by the great challenges that lie ahead. So that's that institution that's helping the Usambara Mountains and the Usambara violets. And then another one is, of course, the Missouri Botanic Garden, which is different from all other American botanic gardens because it does really do a lot of botanizing around the world. That's located in St. Louis. And the Missouri Botanic Garden is running Tanzania Botanical Research and Conservation Program. And here is its co-director, Roy Gero. This is the man who conducted conservation assessments of all 8 of the wild species and 10 different subspecies of St. Paulia. And he says that almost all of the species and subspecies of St. Paulia, Ionanta, are in a perilous position. And I guess some of you are at a loss with this photograph. What he is carrying on his shoulder is the botanical press, but of course it is overloaded. The botanical press consists of 2 wooden surfaces, and in between there's like 2 frames, and in between there are layers of cardboard and newspapers, and inside of newspapers are samples of plants that are flattened and dried this way. This is a standard botanical press. What's not non-standard is that it is heavily overloaded, of course. Usually it's supposed to be much smaller than that. So this was, again, I'm showing you this photograph again because I want, this time it is emphasizing Tanzania Forest Conservation Group. That's that group in Africa that has been working in close contact with all the little villages and their inhabitants. In order to preserve the forest, you have to work with local population and persuade them that the better the forest is doing, the better their lives are going to be. And again, the Missouri Botanic Garden has been training local volunteers in order to do research and collect herbarium specimens and even discover new species. So there are now trained botanists um, among the locals there, thanks to Missouri Botanic Garden. And now we are looking at another players of this game. You see on the American side, there is Optimara company that is the major producer of African violets in the world. And on the European side, there is its predecessor, Whole Camp Greenhouses in Germany. Of course, it all started in Germany, as we know, and the first greenhouses that commercially produced African violets were located in Iselburg, Germany. Then they were jumping across the Atlantic Ocean and starting this Optimara company. Right now, it's a multi-million selling institution that produces these thousands of different cultivars of violets, and its headquarters are in Nashville, Tennessee. Here is what their greenhouse looks like. This is the current vice president, Reinald Holtkamp, and the starter, the Reinhold Holtkamp Jr. On the right, you see the photograph of his granddad, Reinhold Holtkamp Sr., who started the Optimara company on the American side. And in the bottom right corner, you see the famous cultivar, Elfried. This is the first cultivar that was developed from the species, and this was a major breakthrough at the time, because in the natural populations, African violets tend to drop their flowers. And what they managed to achieve with this first cultivar, it became the first non-dropping variety, meaning that the flowers don't fall off and remain on the branches even if they die. So this was a major breakthrough, as I said, because this from this cultivar, they later developed all these thousands of different cultivars that we have and enjoy right now. And that happened in 1965. Of course, right now, the research and this crossing of these violets and producing new cultivars is going on. And the new varieties looking very bizarre sometimes and very unusual. This is one of the newest cultivars that is called My Sensation. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that there is a very large multi-branched African Violet Society in America, and each state has its own branch, including Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, there are few clubs that are united in this branch and are members of African Violet Society. For example, this uh, All Seasons African Violet Club in Framingham, not that far from us. And another one, uh, Patriots African Violet Club, that is traveling from one member to the next. They don't have their headquarters. So there is a possibility that even here at the New Bridge, we can start our own African Violet Club. Let's think about it. Maybe we will join the African Violet Society and become a member of Massachusetts branch. African violets are very interesting plants. They are easy to be propagated from separate leaves. You just stick a cut leaf in a little pot, and usually you cover it with glass or plastic. And in order to keep it moist, the air um, outside the pot, to keep the humidity constant surrounding this leaf that doesn't have roots yet. And you wait for about a month. And after a month, what you get is little young plants at the bottom of this old leaf. And then you part with the old leaf and you have your own young violet. So they're fun not only just to watch, but to propagate too. It's very interesting to get your own, you can get your own violets this easy way. So um, uh, this way we are going to wrap up our conversation about violets, and I hope you now have a better understanding of where they are coming from, and you realize that this beautiful scenery is coming from East Africa, particularly from Tanzania and from Eastern Arc in Tanzania, which is a chain of mountains also containing Usambara Mountains, uh, which are a homeland for Usambara violet or African violet, as we know it here. Uh, Talk to you later. Thank you for listening to me. And next time we'll discuss some other plants. Bye now.